Now, let me start by introducing our panelists. We have just to my right, Mohit Sagar, who is the Managing Director of OpenGov Asia. Further to my right, Seán Kelly, Member of the European Parliament. Next to me then, we have Maurizio Gazzola, Office of Information and Communications Technology of the UN. And then last but not least, Dries Buytaert, founder of Drupal and co-founder of Acquia. So, we're going to have, as usual, opening statements from everyone, and then we will get into a little bit of a panel discussion and hopefully with lots of interaction from everyone here in the room. And, you know, people watching via web streaming as well can send in their questions on Twitter using the hashtag DIGITEC2018. So, with that, Mohit, let me start with you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to get a clicker, please, if I may. Awesome. Here we go. Good afternoon. Okay. I won't get a response. That's going to be a very tough afternoon. You know, I know you've had the caffeine kick in, but let me kick off. Yes, my name is Mohit. I'm part of the OpenGov team from Singapore, believe it or not. And I just got here from 32 degrees. So it's a slight climate change, you know, and people change, but we'll go on with that. Let me talk about government, and that's the space that I'm going to be in today. And government, by and large, has come from a paper-based society. Now, just go back in time and picture this. Everything was documented and stored. And guess what? We had multiple copies of it. It got better. They shared that information. Ever ask somebody for a file? The file would move offices pretty quickly in the old days. But guess what? There were carbon copies, and then came in the photocopier. That just changed the entire ball game. Okay, government started keeping even more stuff of the same thing over and over again. I'm telling you, it still happens. Then came the digital revolution, and everything changed suddenly for them. They got everything electronic. Now, here's the problem with the electronic bit. They spent money. The computers cost in the 80s money, and they had no concept, okay, what really to do with this whole thing. So the sharing stopped a little bit. But just picture the services that government provided on paper suddenly transformed itself onto a computer-based society. That was not digital. All that means was analog, became electronic, but a lot of people call it digital. Pretty funny, right? So that culture still is embedded in that framework. Now, I'm not going to talk about Europe so much because I'm not a European champion, and I'm not going to talk about the United States, but yes, from Asia Pacific, I'll share some insights. But it really comes down to what's next for government, because I want to talk about the future as much as I can. Now, and I'll give you examples of the 4 countries whose flags there are: India, Australia, in no random order, they're just random order, Singapore and Japan. Okay, and I can go on, but the problem is we have 4 panelists over here, and there's a Q&A session, so if I keep rattling on, these guys won't have a chance to speak. So I'm going to move on to this. This is how it all started. Government, when they jumped on digital transformation, guess what happened? They started getting confused because disruption came in play.
I'm sorry, Mr. Baker, but you've developed a severe gluten intolerance.
Now, a baker developing a severe gluten intolerance is shattering. That's all a baker knows what to do, is bake, and combinations thereof, right? So when a baker's life comes to a standstill, can you imagine when government, who's been working on a certain project, comes to a standstill? They are heartbroken. And the panel before, they asked that question about failing fast. But you know what? A project can come to a standstill for multiple reasons. Money runs out, shift of government, shift of policy. It goes on. I mean, the list is endless. But it does happen. Now, that doesn't mean the department folds. What it means is sometimes you merge. They call that a good word now, okay? We're going to give you partnership, and we're going to give you a new leader, and we're going to make you think differently. But that's shattering. And a lot of people within government who work in that space and who have been working in that space because of disruption are heartbroken, and now it's becoming a challenge. So what do? Typically, they go back to the office, they pick up their desk, they start folding the stuff around, because they got to clear everything there is, because they got to keep on working. So they go to a new place. Sometimes they put up a sign that drastic, that they're really shut, but they're not shut. You know, we give it a new name, we surf it around, and we keep calling it disruption. Confusion, lost, Those are the words that stay in people's mind. So now, failing becomes a problem because we're not breeding that culture. But we need to breed that culture. So then what happens? Now, this, in the panel before, and this came up in the World Economic Forum, this is not a stat that everybody's talking about, but we are saying this, right? The technology revolution or the disruption in life is going to create jobs, not take them away. The question is what those jobs look like. So government's entire focus right now is what's next. So chapter 2, okay, of Joseph's life, exponential change brings ultimate possibility. Well, we never stop looking, do we? Because government is not supposed to stop looking. So what does government do? While they are going through their day-to-day activity, they're trying to find out that silver bullet. Some other government must have been able to achieve something that I have not. We call that plagiarism, copying. I think that's brilliant. Government should copy. You should not recreate the wheel because somebody already done it for you before. And we're talking about technology, guys, where you are not profit motivated. So guess what? Copying is the right thing to do. Ask the right question, you get the answer. So here is Joseph, who suddenly found the new book. Now picture that book to be another agency from another country who has done the same thing and was successful. So they're going to help you out. They're going to give you the blueprint, and you're going to assemble your entire team together, and you're going to try and localize it. And you're going to say, come on, guys, let's get together and make this better. So your ingredients kick in. You don't like that much spice, so you add a little bit more sugar to it. You make it a lot more sweeter because that's the taste buds required in the local environment, and boom, you time that to perfection. Okay, then you wait for the end result. This is a new rollout now. It's called phase 2. Right? The new rollout, and you bring your entire team back in together, and guess what? You test it out. And because you created it, you love it. It's your creation. It's like your child. Everybody loves their own child. That's your new creation, and guess what? You are open for business again. Boom. It could be, again, new governance, new leadership, new whatever the case may be. Here's the problem. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 did the exact same thing. Government dictated what needs to happen. So, how do they do that? Laser-like focus. Complete precision. Okay, we gotta make sure every ingredient works for us this time around. We gotta make sure that there's no scope of any failure because somebody else has done it and we are plagiarizing. All we're doing is localizing it. So it's gotta work. Right? It does work. Check this out. Because the moment they come back into play and they say ultimate possibility brings rising customer expectations, boom, here comes Joseph.
Can I get one gluten-free croissant?
Yeah. A gluten-free croissant.
Wait,
yes.
Does that have butter in it?
Yes.
You wouldn't happen to have any without butter, like a butter substitute? Like olive oil or canola oil? Coconut oil, grapeseed oil? I mean, any oils at all?
I gotta return this croissant.
Return a croissant?
There's no nuts. I took a bite. No nuts on the inside. No almonds, no cashews. There's no peanuts in there. There's no walnuts. I expected nuts.
I'm allergic to nuts. I'm also allergic to eggs, milk, butter, sugar, soy.
I'm not allergic to nuts. I'm not allergic to anything. I just want no nuts. Just some nuts.
Wow. That's the sound of your citizens. And here's the best part. You know, a lot of people, a lot of governments around the region tell me, my citizen is my customer. No chance. A customer has a choice. A citizen doesn't have a choice. He or she gets a choice every 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, depending which country they live in, to change the government. Once they've picked the government, for that duration, they have no more say. They can't jump airlines or jump to a different croissant shop. They do not have it. So they're not a customer. They're your citizen, and they're a taxpayer in most countries. So we don't ask them. We just tell them. And that needs to change. Now, we're talking a lot about design thinking, right? The customer knows, or the citizen in this case, knows exactly what he or she wants because technology is enabling them. They spend more money on technology as per person, per capita, than government does as a whole, because they are invested into it. So if you ask the right question at the right time, you will get the right answer. The possibility of success for your citizen comes up with a smile. Now, I will show you a conclusion on this, because there has to be, right? If you ask them what they want and you give them what it is that they need, you're going to get one result. This.
Every year, thousands of people are diagnosed with a gluten intolerance. Where will they go when they need custom-made croissants?
Hi, I'm Joseph from Joseph's Gluten-Free Bakery. When I was diagnosed with a gluten intolerance, I thought my life was over. But after seeing just how many people want custom-made gluten-free croissants, I seized the opportunity to cook up the Croissant Creator app.
The Croissant Creator app.
With over 3 billion combinations, the Croissant Creator app allows you to build your croissant any way you like it and have it delivered fresh to your door.
Or come on down to the store and ask for Joseph. I'll make it for you myself.
He will make it himself. Joseph.
Joseph's Bakery. Let your biggest concerns be my biggest opportunities.
When you're hungry for some dough, you gotta go to Joseph.
Let your biggest concern be my biggest opportunity. That is crux. That's what this is all about. And if you follow this through, the 4 countries I spoke about, and I'm not going to go into that in detail because, like I said, there's a lot to cover and these topics are deep. You know, New South Wales government has rolled out blockchain. Why? Okay, they want a little bit of transparency and they believe it can save them a lot of money. Now, easier said than done, but they are absolutely there. India has the highest identity management biometric enabled for 1.4 billion people. 3 forms of biometrics. Okay, they got the fingerprint, they got the facial recognition, and they got the iris. They spend $1 a person for the most part. And they've rolled it out, and it is a success, and every other country in the region is trying to figure out how, at that scale, with that level of illiteracy, can you do this? But here's the best part. You gotta know your citizen. And suddenly you can give them the services that you're looking for. Singapore has 1 number for every corporation that works over there, just like a single identity. It's the only one of its kind so far. Rolling it out and has rolled it out. So I can interact with 60 agencies at a drop of a hat, seamlessly. Okay? And they are leading that. Japan's aging population is pushing robotics. They have a choice. Should I let other people come into my country to take care of my old? Or should I create a robot that can take care of my people? It's on and on and on. It's pushing the envelope. But let me tell you one thing, please. There are failures in this. There's a lot of learning. And if you picture a staircase, the way I see failure is it's a staircase. You keep walking and you'll get to the top. It's not a vertical thing that's going to kill you and make you down, as long as you're learning from it. Fail fast, get up, do it again, but do it better and do it smarter. That's what a professional does. An amateur will make the same mistake over and over again, but we must have that culture in there to enable people to take the extra step, push the envelope, and see where that can go. Okay, I think there's 2 things left, though. We're talking about this population still globally, because a lot of countries are facing, hey, the elderly who are not computer savvy, okay, who do not trust their governments. Europe's just slightly different. Asia has a different challenge altogether. They haven't earned the trust of their citizen, so when they do things, it's slightly apprehensive. They're not going to get it. But you have a second population. That's this one that trusts everybody so far, till the time we break their trust. So it's a catch-22 of how vast people are and how we're playing with this. Last but not least, and this is my last slide. This is not a new slide. It's not a trick question. Is the glass half full, half empty? Now, I'm not sure what you guys see, but what I see is anybody who wants to add ice in this glass all the time, it'll remain full. You want to surround yourself with people, guys, who always look at a problem and say, I have a solution. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maurizio, may I turn to you? Do you need the little...
I thought Seán.
Yes, please.
Oh, clicker.
This is on. Yeah.
Yes.
The clicker. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Is still everybody awake? That was very entertaining, so I'm not sure I'm going to be as good. So I'll show you what we have. I'm working for the United Nations Office of Information and Communication Technology, and I will tell you a bit what we've been trying to do and what we've been doing throughout the years and what we're trying to put forward in the next future to ensure that we support member states with technology innovation. Everybody knows our Secretary General. He doesn't miss one opportunity to remind us that technology is really what can make the difference, particularly in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is where he continuously tried to drive the innovation within the organization, but also outside towards the member states. And everybody knows this picture, and I think that these are the 17 themes that the member states put together, the Sustainable Development Goals that are really the drivers, and they are very well, I think, defined. Just anybody sees technology there? No, there's no technology there. Technology is underpinning all this. And this is the message that we're trying to push forward to our member states in achieving their goals and getting their challenges addressed. So what we do as a Office of Information Technology, we have been engaging with member states, particularly in many areas, but specifically in improving capacity in law enforcement for our member states, and specifically financial intelligence, drug control, counterterrorism for historical reasons. And we have a portfolio of applications that we are basically deploying into member states' administration. They use them, and they use and manage their data in their jurisdictions. As well as we are launching, and we are, very fast moving, approaching the first year of life of the United Nations Technology Innovation Labs, and we'll talk about it quickly. So our objectives are to provide affordable IT solution to key government institutions for use in their jurisdictions. Everybody here, I think I see my age around there. So everybody here remembers a video recorder, right, before Netflix. So everybody had to buy the box and then put the cassettes in. So what we are doing, we are building the box, we are providing and installing into member states administration, and obviously the member states put the cassette in with their data and they manage their data. So this has been our approach into strengthen national capacity to actually gather the data. And we were talking about, paper government. And I remember many years ago, and very quickly, I was in Nigeria starting an anti-money laundering project. And I went to the chief of the unit, and he told me, and asked him, "What's your problem?" And he said, "Come with me." We went to the dungeon, and we found a room, maybe all this at this level, and it was full of papers. And I said, "This is my problem." When I pick up the first paper, this was the reports from the banking sector in terms of transactions that had, suspicious of money laundering. So I picked up one paper. I went to page 5, and then I went to page 6, and I saw again page 1. So basically, the main problem there was that the reports were obviously sent, the compliance was done, but then nobody could see this data, could analyze this data. So that's why we provided tools to enable these governments to do actually their job. And actually, when we are implementing this solution, obviously the tactical and strategic analysis become something they can do now, and obviously that could go back into formulating rules and laws. So our model is really to develop a software or adopt a software that is out there, put it on top the UN blue flag that is a sign of a honest broker of that provision of this service. We offer this tool free of charge to member states, and we are signed with them a service level agreement to provide support and maintenance to the tool. And the most important thing is the user community of member states who are using this tool are coming together, they're forming an international user group, and they drive the enhancement and the next stage of all these tools that we are there. These are, the icons that you can see if the presentation will be shared, but we have more than 100 countries that use at least one of the tools that we provide. So it's been quite successful from that perspective. This is, for example, the anti-money laundering tool. Is used by 51 member states, and the latest deployment were in Germany and Switzerland. And basically, this tool collects transactional data from the banking sector, do analysis on these transactions, provide targeting and intelligent packages to law enforcement. And we have a long list of other tools from countering illegal drugs and the drug problem, data intelligence sharing, and so on. That's the other important thing that comes out now because we are in the EU, and this is where another model is coming through. The government of the Netherlands gave us the intellectual property rights and donated to the UN the intellectual property rights of their passenger name record tracking system. And as you may know, there's a Security Council resolution 2396 and 2178, which require member states, mandate member states to obtain advanced passenger information and passenger name records. These are the information that we gave whenever we check into a flight. So that's the data of everybody around this table, and around this audience. And they are supposed to collect the biometric data as well. And member states have to do analysis for counterterrorism purposes. So identify the bad guys who are traveling through the commercial system. So Go Travel is the solution that we have there. We're supporting all the standards. That's very important. We're supporting GDPR as well, and that's a major problem when we want to provide the tool to non-EU member states, and that's where conflict of laws can also be there, and this is where the UN is organizing themselves also to look at not only the technology deployment, but also all the legal frameworks and the operational frameworks as well to deal with this data that is obviously 99.9% clean data that or passenger that should be going through the airport without any checks or any control. So through the Office of Counterterrorism, this is where the legislative work is done. Another area, I don't need to talk to you about cybercrime, and these are even old information. So what we also do, we are trying to push forward a new concept. As you know, the UN is peacekeeping, is the blue helmets that are deployed in physical places where there's a conflict and where the UN is trying to resolve the conflict. So now, obviously, in the digital space, we are talking about digital blue helmets. We're trying to put together teams that are expert in this area and are working on monitoring centers around the globe and assist member states against the cyber crime issue. Technology Innovation Lab. I'm going very fast, I'm sorry, but you will see that I have very little time, and you'll probably see the slides, I hope, into the website so you can go through and contact us. So the Technology Innovation Lab is a new initiative. Let's see if the video starts.
The fourth industrial revolution has changed virtually every industry in the last decade. And now it's time to apply that change to deliver on UN mandates. Moving humanity forward faster by focusing on the use of innovative technology is critical to reach the UN goals. The goal of UNTIL is to function as a startup environment and create a platform for collaborative problem solving between UN resources, academia, the private sector, and civil society. Each lab will link this platform with innovators from across the globe and facilitate the global exchanges of ideas and resources. To solve some of the humanity's most pressing needs, the UNTIL labs will use cutting-edge technology such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, fintech, and drones. With locations in Europe, Africa, Asia, and more planned in other parts of the world, Each lab will focus on specific thematic areas. In Finland, for example, the first state-of-the-art Until lab focuses on peace and security, education, health, and circular economy. It's situated at the center of a vibrant startup hub within the Aalto University campus in Espoo. The Global Until Network is planning multiple collaborative projects to help the member states in progressing the UN mandate in the areas of peace and security, international law, humanitarian affairs, human rights, and sustainable development. All labs will support one another, sharing their information and experiments and communicating successes and learnings. The labs will invent, they will incubate, and they will accelerate technology-based products and services that would address problems and find optimal solutions. We are convinced that this new global initiative will help us lift multitudes of people out of poverty, achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and enable developing countries to advance into a better future.
Okay, that was my boss, so I hope she's happy that she was on the screen. And so just go back, Finland is up and running, so we have worked with the government. They provide the space and infrastructure, cover for the infrastructure cost, and we're working with all an ecosystem of local Finnish setup, but also we are connecting them to the other labs. We have 2 labs already operational, one in Malaysia and one in Egypt. These are the thematic areas that we're working on. So we are working, for example, in Finland with 4 PhD students who basically are testing their algorithm to predict yield of crops, and they want to test their algorithm in Egypt in a different environment. So that's what our facilitation, our work is about, to try to connect, not to reinvent the wheel. We're talking to India on the ID project. We want to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel somewhere else, but we use whatever has been done down there. And this is where the 2 things that we talked about previously comes in. We are providing solution to the government, to government entities, and we're using the lab to make sure that the components of these solutions are refreshing, are using new technology, are making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, and we are providing services to their needs. So just 2 more slides on what we learned. Basically, all countries are facing similar challenges, obviously to different level of degrees. The SDGs are really summarizing quite comprehensively what are those challenges. And technology innovation is a key to enable the achievement of the SDG. And obviously, to resolve the challenges, member states usually have to collect data, have to analyze data, have to share data. So these are the 3 building blocks that are there. Obviously, it's very difficult to Mohit's point to do all this and effectively do all this to serve the citizen without technology. So what proved to be effective for member states? Basically, the idea to build the standards of the tool collaboratively and with end users across the jurisdiction. Criminality and law enforcement is not anymore a problem that you can resolve in your jurisdiction. You have to, it's across jurisdiction. So the global applicability of the tools that we have is key. And obviously agreeing to work together and proactively improving and adjusting not only the solution, but also the processes. And the solution that adjusts the process and vice versa. So that's very, very key. And obviously the UN is engaged as a honest broker through adding value, and obviously we don't have the mandate to look at the data of the member states. So the data remains local within the jurisdiction of the member state. The member state decides to share it with other countries based on their rules and legislation. But we are basically providing the video recorder we were talking about before. And what the member states recognize after engaging with us, the legislative mandates must be enabled through lean standard processes, connected to technology. The 2 legislative world and the technology world have to work together. This is why it's very important also from a technology innovation lab perspective. We're trying to bring government, academia, private sector, big companies and small companies, trying to work together to resolve a problem. Economies of scale can be leveraged through technology innovation. We don't need to reinvent and rebuy the same products time and time again, government by government buying the same thing, but the capital cost of building these video recorders is met once. And then it can be shared, because we're working, and we were talking with Dries as well about open source technology that can be obviously shared. And also technology is quite agnostic, and is there also to build trust. You know, the main problem that we find between states is the difficulty to trust each other and to share data between each other, but we cannot counter, you know, the challenges that we have today without sharing data. So having the same tool, having the same processes, talking to the people that you're building the tool with is actually building trust. And sharing best practices, knowledge, and mistakes as well, it's really getting to the next point of sharing actual data at the click of a button. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next now we have Seán Kelly, an MEP from my home country, who's going to tell us a bit about what the European Parliament has been doing on the issue of innovation.
Thank you, Jennifer, and ladies and gentlemen. Now for a more traditional presentation, in line with politicians known for speaking speeches, etc. So it's a pleasure to be here, and allow me to begin my contribution this afternoon session by thanking the organisers for the opportunity to speak at this very important event. Without well-functioning digital and IT services, our institutions would not be able to function with the efficiency they do today. From a Parliament perspective, our institution would be less open, less engaged with the public, and less transparent were it not for the cutting-edge digital services provided by DIGITEC. And I know the same goes for SMART in the Council and DIGIT in the Commission. These services are vital for the functioning of the European legislative processes, and therefore greatly enhance the democratic nature of our activities here in Brussels. The digital transformation of government and public administrative services is an extremely important issue, as we've just heard, even if it is one that's not given the publicity it deserves. Every day, millions of Europeans deal with public administrative services, be it renewing a driver's license, filling tax returns, applying for educational grants, dealing with public administration, is an inevitable part of their life. And it continues. I've noticed that even in Ireland, in relation to the Common Agricultural Policy and the CAP payments, more and more of it is being done online. The move towards digital services offers important benefits in terms of efficiencies and quality of service, and that is why I've consistently been a supporter of EU initiatives that promote this digital transformation. Too often we have heard from businesses and citizens about the administrative burdens posed by public administrations, not least here in Brussels. Since becoming an MEP in 2009, I have heard many constituents about the complex nature of project applications under EU programmes. To move to fully digital in most areas has made many of these programmes far easier to navigate, such as the different online portals that are now available across the board. This is crucially important, as this simplification through digital platforms has made the benefits of the European Union more accessible to the average person. And why do we need it? The e-government action plan that has been coordinated by the Commission in recent years has been extremely positive in developing e-government at member state level. It allows the exchange of best practice and, crucially, the interoperability of solutions between member states, which has accelerated the switch. Progress has been made, but still there is more work to be done. Digital public services are quite developed in countries like Finland, Estonia, Denmark and Spain, whereas much work still needs to be done to provide e-government services in other countries, such as Greece, Hungary, Romania and Croatia. The Digital Single Market Strategy for Europe includes a new e-government action plan for 2016-2020. This plan aims to remove existing digital barriers and to prevent any market fragmentation arising for the modernisation of public administrative services. It will join up efforts in the EU by giving a shared long-term vision that will help to focus efforts in all member states and coordinate efforts on public sector modernisation efforts and resources. The aim is that by 2020, public administrations and institutions in the EU should be open, efficient, inclusive, providing borderless, personalised, user-friendly, end-to-end digital public services to all citizens and businesses in the EU. This is quite an ambitious objective, but I think the recent efforts have brought results. Take the figures on online service completion for 2017. That is to say, the share of administrative steps related to the registration of major life events that can be completed online. Malta, Portugal, Estonia, Austria, Lithuania, Denmark, Spain and Finland all have comprehensive digital options in this regard, with other countries, including my own Ireland, not far behind. Other countries have made some important progress in recent years. Additionally, the provision of digital public services for businesses is steadily improving across the EU, and also people are becoming more engaged. For instance, over the summer, there was a public consultation on whether we would end the biannual clock change, which has been in this part of the world now for over 100 years. Up until now, any other public consultation, I think the maximum respondents was 322,000. For this, we had 4.6 million people responded over a 6-week period. And interestingly, over 80% wanted to end the biannual clock change, which I am promoting as well in the European Parliament. I am pleased with the ambition shown by the Commission on digital development in the new multi-annual financial framework, and I expect that it will accelerate and lead to big advances in the digital transition in the coming years. The Digital European Programme, which we are currently discussing in Parliament, will bring 9.2 billion in investment to meet our digital objectives. The proposal focuses on 5 key areas. Firstly, supercomputers. There will be 2.7 billion provided for the funding of projects to strengthen supercomputing and data processing in Europe, and will ensure a wider use of supercomputing both in the private and public sectors. The potential benefits for public services and administrations in this regard, particularly in the area of e-health, are enormous. Secondly, 2.5 billion will be dedicated to the development of artificial intelligence and will aim to give better access to public authorities and businesses to AI testing and experimentation facilities, and this will complement the research priorities set in Horizon Europe, the EU's new research and innovation framework, to develop these technologies and keep Europe at the cutting edge of innovation. Recently, I attended the Silicon Valley on behalf of my committee, and there we visited all the IT companies, and it was from Facebook to NASA to Palo Alto, etc. And we had a lot of engagement on cybersecurity, and we learned about the enormous challenges that are there. Without doubt, cybersecurity is an important element to all of this, and I will elaborate further on this issue in a few moments. However, I'm pleased that the Digital Europe programme will allocate 2 billion into boosting cyber defence and the EU's cybersecurity industry. With increased digitalisation, particularly in public administration, more and more valuable data will be used and processed. It is vital that strong security measures are in place to prevent data breaches, the big worry nowadays. Additionally, digital skills will be prioritised in the programme, and I feel this is an extremely important element. The digital transformation will require a significant upskilling of workers across the Union. If we want to ensure that public administrative services are made available in digital form, it is essential, of course, that workers are equipped with the necessary skills. The fifth and final priority of the Digital Europe programme, and one that is crucially important in the context of this afternoon's discussion, is that it aims to ensure a wide use of digital technologies across the economy and society. This means there will be 1.3 billion allocated to ensure the digital transformation of public administration and public services in their EU-wide interoperability. The programme will establish digital innovation hubs, which are intended to act as one-stop shops for SMEs and public administration to provide technical expertise and advice. This will bring enormous opportunities to assist our public administrations in moving to digital, particularly in parts of Europe where this has not been as rapid as in others, or where there has been less innovation for whatever reason. The Digital Europe programme is currently going through Parliament, and I hope that we'll be able to vote on our position soon in plenary, with the report expected to progress through the ITRE committee tomorrow, of which I am a member. My colleague, MEP Pilar del Castillo from Spain, is doing some excellent work on behalf of the EPP group, and I will work with her to help get this important programme, which is so vital for the continued digital transition, over the line and into negotiations with Council. While the move to digital is vitally important and brings significant benefits, I think it's important to elaborate a bit on the importance of cybersecurity and the need to safeguard the data that will be collected as a result of the move to digital systems. For this reason, I welcome the Commission's moves to strengthen the Agency for Network Information Security, ENISA, and I feel it will prove to be an important step in the coming years. Recent years have seen a big increase in data breaches. We've all heard of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, when the personal data of millions of people was used for political purposes without their consent, and indeed cybercrime, with statistics showing a massive increase in the scale of ransomware attacks in the European Union. Such activities demonstrate the lucrative value such data has, and this has obvious implications for public administrations as we move to digital systems and more data is used and stored. Public administrations need to be capable of ensuring that this data is protected against attempts to steal it. This is an issue of major concern to EU citizens. Cyber attacks in recent years have impacted such things as online banking and key infrastructure in EU member states, and 87% of EU citizens regard cybercrime as an important challenge to the EU's internal security. 64% of the United States population has experienced a data breach. This is obviously a very serious issue. The Commission's proposal on cybersecurity would task ENISA with overseeing the development of cybersecurity certification schemes, would empower ENISA to participate in the development of cybersecurity policy at EU level, and would require the agency with support to member states in improving capacities and expertise. Additionally, the agency would become the one-stop shop for cybersecurity information from EU institutions, would be in charge of the incident response teams providing assistance to member states, and crucially, ENISA would handle large-scale cybersecurity incidents. I believe this legislation is going in the right direction to safeguard the data we need for the digital transformation, and will empower us to accelerate this transition in coming years. Finally, as an MP who is a rapporteur, the European Parliament's negotiating team on the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, I would like to say a short word on how that legislation fits into the area of digital transformation in public administrations. The GDPR requires public administrations, when processing personal data, to respect three key principles: fair and lawful processing, purpose limitation, data minimization, and data retention. It is essential that individuals are informed about the data processing, for example, providing information on the purpose of the data processing, the type of data collected, the recipients, and their rights. Additionally, public bodies must appoint a data protection officer and ensure that personal data is secured. Since the GDPR has been applied in the last few months, many people I have spoken to have complained about the additional administrative burden in places on companies, public bodies, etc., and haven't been too complimentary about it. So, in going about their everyday activities, they find this an extra burden. However, we should not lose sight of the importance of this regulation. It is essential in strengthening the fundamental rights of our citizens in the digital age, and applies the same rules throughout the Union, which simplifies the move towards a digital single market. Incidentally, Mark Zuckerberg, when he was before the European Parliament, outlined the GDPR and said that he would expect and hope that it will become the global rather than just the European operation standard. The GDPR protects the rights of citizens to have their personal data protected and to access the data that has been collected and to have it rectified as outlined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. I believe the regulation we agreed and is now in force strikes the right balance between protecting these important rights and not being overly burdensome for businesses and administrations. As time progresses, I think all will get to grips with the changes it has brought and learn to manage the requirements effectively. To conclude, I would like to congratulate once again the organisers of this excellent conference. I think it is an extremely important topic. The discussions and the expert speakers are very inspiring, and the ideas that are put forward today can feed into the important objective of the digital transformation of our public services. And I look forward in the months ahead when we finalise some important policies at European Parliament level that will drive this transition in the coming years. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Seán, and I know you can't stay with us because you have to dash off to the OECD, so thank you for making time for us. I'm sure we will be touching on both GDPR and ANISA's expanded remit and so on in the course of our discussion. But let me turn now to, last but not least, Dries. Please give us your comments on your presentation.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about open source and how open source can be used in the public sector. I don't know how many people are familiar with Drupal and Acquia. Maybe raise your hand if you know Drupal. All right, wow, quite a few people. That's awesome. So I started the Drupal project about 18 years ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I've been doing open source. I've been doing web and digital for really all of my professional career. I'm also an entrepreneur, a startup founder, and very passionate about helping to drive digital transformation for a lot of organizations. If you don't know Drupal, Drupal is essentially software that organizations use to build websites. What's special about Drupal is that it's open source. So what that means is that everybody can use Drupal. You can download it, you don't have to pay for it. You can install it, run it, you can make changes to it, you can share those changes with other people. So fast forward 18 years, and now Drupal is one of the largest open source projects in the world. And so this open source license has effectively transformed into an innovation model. We now have thousands of individuals and more than 1,000 organizations that are actively contributing to the development of the open source Drupal project. So it's a little bit like Wikipedia in a way where a lot of people help write the content of Wikipedia. Similarly, we have a lot of people, a lot of organizations helping with the development of the open source Drupal project. So that is all great. There's a lot of benefits to open source, especially sort of the speed of innovation, right? If you have thousands of people contributing code on a daily basis, you have sort of this tsunami of innovation coming from the open source community. But for a lot of organizations, especially large organizations or traditional organizations, it's not always easy to adopt open source. And so about 10 years ago, I decided to start a company, called Acquia. And what we try to do is really help large organizations, consume open source the way that they are used to consuming, software, buying software from traditional vendors. So I like to believe we combine the best of both worlds. This has been extremely successful. For us, we've been one of the fastest growing startups. We've grown to almost 900 people in 10 years' time. So for a startup, that's good growth. And so today we have a whole platform, and I'm not going to talk to all of these things, that really kind of wrap around the open source Drupal to allow our customers to innovate on top of that. And so I wanted to give a few examples. So because Drupal actually has a long history in government. So It actually started in 2003. So this is Howard Dean, presidential candidate in the United States. And he was really the first presidential candidate to leverage the power of the internet. And to do so, he built a campaign platform. He built some software that allowed him to campaign for his candidacy. And so he happened to use Drupal under the hood, but it was called DeanSpace, which was basically a version of Drupal, a distribution of Drupal. And Howard Dean was absolutely the underdog. Like, he was sort of a not well-known candidate, but he actually got quite far because he was able to use the internet and he was able to leverage thousands of people to really help him campaign. And so obviously he didn't win, but he got quite far. And he was the first to do that. And so by the next elections, basically every presidential candidate was using Drupal to campaign, which was pretty interesting. And obviously now, it's very normal to use the internet. And unfortunately, I would say, with the last elections, social media really took over the campaign platform. And, we all know what happened, with the American elections. But Drupal really was kind of, there from the beginning to help people campaign. 2009, actually, the White House decided to adopt Drupal. And so we rebuilt whitehouse.gov on Drupal in, about, 6 to 9 months, so pretty quick. But that was a monumental milestone because this was the first time that the US government had, really adopted an open source project, and not just for any kind of website, but, for something as visible and large as whitehouse.gov. And I'm not sure if you know, but there is 24,000 websites in the federal government, just in the US alone. And of those, about 10 of them are, mission critical. So basically, they're not allowed to go down ever. And so what was great is obviously that they adopted open source and Drupal, and that in the 8 years of the Obama administration, there was no security issue, there was no downtime. And so huge testament to open source, the security of open source, as well as the scalability. And President Obama also did a lot of innovation. Like, he really tried to reimagine how to engage with citizens. And he built something called We the People, which was basically a platform where every citizen got an account. So everybody could log into wethepeople.com, which obviously it's 300-something million people, and could petition online. You could say, hey, I want this to be changed. And then other people could vote on each of these suggestions. And President Obama said, well, if one of these petitions get, and I forgot the exact number, but he said if they get 20,000 votes, I promise that my office will provide an official response to this petition. And it was hugely successful. They had to continuously raise the bar to, like, from 20,000 to, I don't even know, maybe 500,000 votes or something. And it was really quite cool. Like, one of the things that changed, for example, is, Europe is way ahead of this compared to the US, but not too long ago in the US, cell phones were bundled with a subscription. And you couldn't buy a cell phone without buying a cell phone. You couldn't buy a physical phone without the cell phone subscription. And so this was one of the first petitions, obviously bubbled right to the top. And it actually led to a new law that forced the telecom operators to unbundle the phones from the plans. So it was great. It was a huge success. Of course, there was all sorts of petitions, thousands of them. One of them was actually for the US government to build the Death Star. And so obviously the internet wouldn't be the internet, and people would vote this up very quickly. And so obviously the Death Star proposal would reach the threshold, and so now President Obama had to respond to this. And so they actually wrote a formal response, and they said, we will not build the Death Star. Because we're working hard not to destroy other planets. We're working hard to reduce the deficit, and it would cost like several $1 trillion to build. And then, oh, by the way, why would we build it if it could be destroyed by this very small, ship? And so We the People was a huge success and a great example of, I think, how you can innovate in open source. All of this code, by the way, was made available as open source. And so other governments, like the Australian government, have adopted it. And they're also running, We the People like platforms now, which is pretty cool. So not only did Whitehouse.gov use open source, they also really embraced it and started to give back in many ways. So obviously that led Acquia to make all sorts of investments in making sure that our platform can scale and is secure. And it really led to sort of an explosion, if you will, of Drupal and open source in governments around the world. And there's too many examples, but the United Nations is using a lot of open source. The European Commission is using a lot of open source. Actually, you have a very healthy internal community of about 100 people that use Drupal and also contribute back to Drupal. The Australian government actually has decided to move every government website to open source. I mean, it's a massive digital transformation for them. For yet another government, we've done a lot of innovative things like an Alexa or a voice assistant integration. So a lot of governments obviously need to have all of their websites accessible. And for this particular government, they had a very old system, like literally had a phone system. And if you were visually impaired, you could dial a number, and a robot would basically pick up and would read you the website left to right, top to bottom. And so as you can imagine, some government websites actually span 100 departments and maybe have 20,000 pages. So imagine trying to navigate that kind of website, right? And so one of the things that we've done for a number of governments is really just integrate a voice assistant. And all of a sudden, you don't have to dial a phone number. All of a sudden, you don't have to have a website read to you, but you can just ask the question like, hey, where can I get my fishing license? And the website literally responds through Alexa. So it's just one example of sort of a digital innovation and transformation that we've been doing for a lot of our customers. Trying to think if there's others that I want to highlight. I'll probably leave it at that and sort of maybe answer more questions in the Q&A. I personally believe there's a lot of benefits to using open source in government. Obviously, because of the license, it tends to help with budgets. You don't have to pay very large license fees. It also reduces the reliance on a single vendor, which is actually quite powerful because there's no vendor lock-in. So if you're unhappy with an open source vendor, you can literally take all of the code and give it to the next vendor, and that person or that organization can just pick up where they left and keep going. And so there's very little risk in many ways. It also, as I mentioned, leads to collaboration. Governments working together, governments working with the private sector on innovation. Some of the governments actually, that use open source, they want their vendors, their private company vendors that they work with, to contribute to open source. It's actually a requirement for them to be hired to do work for them, because they know that private companies that understand open source and that know how to contribute to open source will deliver better software and will deliver software that's more maintainable. But anyway, this collaboration, not just within government, between government and the private sector, between government and individuals, is actually quite interesting and very powerful, because it obviously accelerates the innovation and also, better serves citizens. Like, the rate of experimentation, the rate of keeping up with the transformation in the world is hard. It's hard to do unless lots of people work together. There's also been examples, of an individual citizen fixing a bug in a government website, which is kind of amazing, or adding a feature to a government website in a way that they would have never been able to do. Obviously, it needs to be taken through an approval and acceptance process, but the fact that everybody can say, after work at night, like, you know what, I'm going to make this site a little bit better, not just for me, but for everybody else, is pretty powerful. The fact that everybody has access to that code, also has all sorts of advantages in terms of security and privacy. I mean, it's been a hot topic this year, but algorithms are starting to have a huge impact on society, and not having transparency around these algorithms is a huge challenge. And so open source can be part of the solution there, I believe. So I'm pretty bullish on open source. I'm also biased. But I've seen a lot of successes all around the world with governments using open source. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dries, and thank you for your Death Star analogy, because there was someone tweeting earlier that we were biased against Star Wars in favor of Star Trek at this conference.
We fixed that.
We fixed that. Now, I will say that both yourself, Mohit, and Maurizio, you both said don't reinvent the wheel in your presentations. And I'm wondering, how big a problem is that? Do we think people in organizations are really going around trying to reinvent the wheel? Because our last panel was always about trying to encourage creativity and new ways of thinking. So, Mohit, do you want to take that first?
Sure. So, why reinvent the wheel when I was saying was plagiarize it, right? Okay, and that's exactly what you came out of your presentation. There's a platform, build on the platform, don't spend time working in silos. So if somebody's done it, look at that, take that, and make it better and share it back with them. That's what we mean by saying, do not reinvent what's been done. Because a lot of people start spinning the disk at the same places. And while you're spinning them in the same places, you spend the same amount of money doing the exact same thing, and the end result is what? So look at your successes around you, ask them for it, and make it better.
I fully agree. I think from my perspective, this is really the role that we see in an organization like ours, that really try to make sure that communication flows and that knowledge flows and the best practices flows, because as we mentioned, most governments have similar problems to address, and they cannot address it themselves. I was talking to Nokia in Finland a few days ago. They want to help us on the technology innovation in lab in Finland, and I was saying, but what is in it for you? And they say, well, we realize we're never going to be able to hire all the most innovative people to work for Nokia. So we want to make sure that we don't reinvent things. We make sure that we help people to come up with, who has the idea, to come up to scale up, to ensure that the market will grow together. So this is the value added, and I think the same proposition is from Dries. Basically, let's have a source code that can be improved instead of just duplicated and rebuilt in different way to do the same things.
Well, I was struck in the video that you showed, actually, I noticed there was a little Instagram logo and so on up there. And since we're talking about public space and providing better digital services to the public, is there a sort of sense where we should just, as public institutions, use the tools that people are already using and build on top of those? I mean, I guess this is an extension of what you say. Mohit, you're shaking your head.
No chance. Okay, and let me explain why. A lot of governments in Asia try to say, hey, if Facebook knows you, it's you, and that's your identity. Well, actually, Facebook doesn't know you, and Facebook is not secure in any capacity, so I can become an actor on Facebook and have a completely different identity. So yes, you can use certain tools to get your message across, but you've got to understand, where do you stop using the private sector and as government still retain the integrity of your citizen, especially of the data. And that's why GDPR has such a big flow on this, right? Because you can't outsource that to a third party, and that to do one, Amazon, Google, or Facebook. They're the three you're talking about right now. So everything sits in the United States of America. And the rest of the world says, that's good. The US suddenly knows everybody, and that's not true. So that's why I'm a pretty firm advocate of no chance. You've got to have government take control of that.
Okay, I mean, that's in terms of specific platforms. But what about this idea that, maybe new technologies, be it blockchain, be it, algorithmic decision-making or whatever, do public institutions have, I don't know, an obligation to push things forward through the use of public procurement? Because that can really drive things, the development of technologies in a whole new direction. Dries, what do you think?
do they have a responsibility to push things forward? I mean, so, you know, candidly, I feel like I think there's a responsibility to keep up versus pushing, to be honest. Like, I feel like a lot of governments are actually failing us right now because they're slow to help us regulate certain things. So I would start by keeping up with the technology change that's happening in the world and around us first, and then switch to pushing. I mean, I do think there's a lot of pushing that can happen in terms of, you know, in terms of encouraging entrepreneurship and encouraging, you know, technology startups to flourish within Europe and to do so within the right kind of legal framework. So probably a little bit of both, but I think being able to, you know, keep up with what's going on right now, I think would be first great step.
Is that how you see it?
Yeah, no, and that's maybe my personal view, but basically sometimes government should just not do anything and let things happen, and maybe that, you know, and then encourage instead of try to regulate, over-regulate, whatever is, it doesn't need to be regulated.
I mean, if they're always just playing keep up, we won't have sort of EU digital winners like Estonia that's kind of pioneering in e-government. Okay.
No, and you're right, you've got to push the envelope. I mean, the question is, you don't push the envelope in every aspect. You pick and choose where you're going with. New technology needs to be deployed, okay? Because the citizens and the private sector are going to use it. So if government's always playing catch-up, government cannot dictate anything because you're not learning. So if you take Singapore as an example, it pushes quietly and learns very smartly where it's going. And that, I think, gives them a chance to, if they're failing, you don't know about the failure, because fail behind the scene, as opposed to announce the big announcement and then suddenly say, well, I'm not sure how to go about doing this. So there are two steps over there, and I think we got to be quite mindful as to where are we going with this.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple of questions from our Slido. The first one from Conrad, Mohit, to you is, how do you attract people who love to find solutions to solve your particular problems within an organization?
How do you find them?
How do you attract those people?
You create a culture that says, we don't see it as a problem, we see it as we need to find the solution. So it really is about the culture. And by the way, there'll be failure over there. So create the culture that says, if you fail, that's okay, because we're trying to succeed. And by the way, that's done in small steps. It's not the entire company. You're not, you know, banking the entire thing out there. You're taking small parts of that.
I think in a startup world, we talk a lot about, you know, fail well, in a way, which, and well is a combination of different things. It's fast, but also in a way that you learn from your failures. And like, you know, it's a pretty powerful feedback loop if you do that well.
Okay, then a question, Dries, directed towards you, which is, how can we improve our public procurement procedures to encourage the use of open source software? So procedures maybe rather than regulations just saying you must use open source.
What do I think about that?
Yeah.
I think it's great. I think...
And how can it be done? You know, have you any tips or advice for how to procedurally to encourage that?
Yeah. Well, let me speak to the topic a little bit. I think historically what we've seen is that open source has been adopted in a grassroots way. You know, it's technical people bring it into an organization because they believe it's the better solution, and also it's what they can get their hands on, right? Proprietary software can be hard because you need to give a phone call, then you get to go through a demo, and so it's just hard to get started with proprietary software. So open source historically has kind of bubbled up, and what's changing right now is that there is you know, policies and mandates to actually from the top to push open source down the organization. And that combination of sort of that grassroots, the bottoms-up movement combined with the you know, push down is actually a pretty powerful combination that's going to unleash a lot of open source. And I think that's where it starts. I think what a lot of organizations have missing is like how they can now enable their employees or their, you know, to not only use open source, but to give back to open source. And it's what a lot of, like in a large organization or a large institution where there's thousands of people, like people don't know what to do, and they usually need to go through a legal department or something like, can I give this back or not? And so like, how do you create frameworks for those people that allow them to make these decisions themselves without having to kind of, get stuck. Because, and so I think you should default as an organization to open source and letting people contribute back to open source. And then, of course, maybe not everything can be open source, but like document that so people know when not to make something open source. So flip the model is really what I'm saying.
Yeah, India has an open source first-to-go platform, believe it or not, as a government, not in the private sector. And a lot of governments in Asia are going down that same pathway. You've got to flirt with the idea. You've got to keep your mind open.
And time again.
That's what governments are doing, and there is a natural shift towards it. The original shift was not there because they considered it to be not secure. That myth is overcome now. So there were two myths. Open source is free, and because it's free, it's not secure. Both of those myths have been overcome, so I think it's now in a much more secure platform. Yeah.
Okay, now I know we've got people coming in from our other rooms as we kind of get towards the end on our final presentations, but let me just see if we have lights, if there's any questions for this panel before we move on to the next section. Anyone got any questions for Mohit, Maurizio, or Dries? Well, that's fine. We've solved the problem.
Right here.
Great.
This one here.
Okay, we have one here.
Box.
Good.
Question about Drupal. So you've mentioned US governance, several governments adopting Drupal. What about EU governance, so Parliament, Commission? How well we are adopting Drupal?
Europe? Well, the European Commission uses a lot of Drupal. There's about 150 plus websites, including the main website of Europe. So there's a lot of great examples here. A lot of Drupal in local government cities all around Europe using Drupal as well. So it really scales, I guess, from smaller governmental websites to some of the largest in Europe. So yeah, it's pretty well adopted, I would say. I don't have quantitative data or actual factual data about it, but my gut tells me it's pretty well adopted.
Okay, any other queries on how to provide better digital services, which is a pretty big question? No? Okay. You know how to do it now. Yeah. They're going to go, that's fine. Right. With that, let me say thank you to this panel, and please, those who are just arriving from other rooms, take your seats and join me in thanking you.